Welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange. Stories by leaders for leaders to help you to raise the bar on your own performance and to release the potential inside of you. Now, here's today's episode. Greetings, this is Hugh Ballou, founder and president of Center Vision Leadership Foundation. Every Tuesday at 2 o'clock Eastern, we interview somebody that's got a message to share, different walks of life, different experience, different skill sets. And not everybody's done everything perfectly. We've all learned from these opportunities we've had to reboot and reset the bar. And so I have a friend today, Dan Goodwin, who's going to tell you in just a minute about the shtick. But we're gonna help you up your game. So the title of today's interview is A Cautionary Tale, Corporate Lessons Applied to Entrepreneurship. Now you say, I'm running a church or a nonprofit. I'm not an entrepreneur. Excuse me, you're a social entrepreneur. You're forging new ground, you're doing something that's important, and you're not working in the corporate system. So how to identify and avoid future disasters. That's what this is about. So Dan Goodwin, welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange today. And please tell people a little bit about who you are.
Well, thank you, Hugh. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for this opportunity. So my name is Dan Goodwin, and I'm a business consultant. I'm located in the Kansas City area, and my background experience was 19 years in the corporate world, and then 14 years since for the entrepreneurial world. And those I serve, I'm able to take my corporate skills as an internal investigator for a Fortune 500 company, and then parlay those and leverage those for business owners and even some corporations that may be in scale-up mode. So that's kind of who I am and how I serve.
And your message, I'm seeing as a universal message. We're talking to nonprofit leaders and clergy who don't realize they're actually running a business. So why does your message apply to them?
Yes. So I have a friend here in Kansas City who has done numerous startups for nonprofit organizations. And it is true. Best practices applies no matter if you're a corporate entity, if you're a nonprofit entity, or if you're a solopreneur. You are better served when you have best practices, and that includes kind of what we're going to talk about today. And I even go down to the point, Hugh, of telling my new clients that every decision they make needs to be thought about you incorporated. It's the Hugh Ballou plan for world domination. It's the Dan Goodwin plan for world domination, because in the end, we need to make sure that we have protected ourselves in order to provide best value to whoever we choose to serve in our own client space.
So your background says CYAA, cover your ankle consulting. What is this?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one interpretation. So cover your assets. You may have heard it differently in your locality. Yes, it's tongue in cheek, and obviously everybody knows what they've heard CYA to stand for. But I've actually considered doing CYA to cubed. Okay, so basically cover your assets, curate your assets, and then circulate your assets. So we're going from what one of my mentors used to call eating money, right? What we need to do to survive and pay our bills, all the way to circulate. What are we going to do for legacy when we decide when the time is when we leave this earth?
So that's an important part, a legacy. What we're creating is a legacy. And we start this journey wanting to impact humankind with doing good and sharing what we can do to help others. However, we're starting an organization which ought to be a legacy that goes on past our years. And that's my desire for Center Vision Leadership Foundation, is it's got methodologies and programs and systems that can be run without me. Now, you picked a title today, Corporate Lessons Applied to Entrepreneurship. And I connected the dots that nonprofit leaders are social entrepreneurs. It's a very specific niche of doing good for others and impact to the culture. So, and then it's about how to identify and avoid future disasters. So talk a little bit about that, and then I'll ask you some more specific questions. So why did you hone in on that for a topic and a title today?
Well, Hugh, when I left the corporate world, one of the things I quickly discovered was that small and medium businesses have the same issues that big businesses do, and that being the human issues, right? The fraud, the theft, the embezzlement, the inappropriate relationships, all of the things you sometimes see in the news. And while I found myself helping business owners react and work through those, I discovered that on the proactive side, it could be, some of those could have been avoided. And that's really where I started to, what they say, hit your stride as far as who I was able to serve and kind of head some of those problems off at the pass. So that was really the beginning, was responding to crises and then figuring out not only helping them through crises, how to respond to it, stop the bleeding, make the adjustments, make sure that one never happened again, that particular problem. But I found out that there was some methodology that probably could have prevented those from happening in the first place.
That's a blind spot for a lot of nonprofit leaders. And I want to remind people, when we're using the word business, you're in a tax-exempt business when you're running a charity or church or synagogue. There's the business of church, there's the business of the charity, which we sometimes neglect, which then compromises the work we're able to do. So I used to live in a smaller town of 30,000 people, and in 1 year, there were 3 nonprofits that had $750,000 disappear off their books because they put somebody in a signature position that they had not done a background check, and they had not installed systems that would let them know or would prevent that. But we say, oh, it's a good person, we don't need to do that. They would never do this. And so there's probably a lot of loss in that area. So that's probably one of the areas you're talking about. So why implement best practices to avoid some of these situations?
Wow. Well, that could be a 4-hour seminar by itself. So best practices allow you to mitigate risk. So the greatest business plan in the world, Hugh, it's a risk mitigation plan. That's really what a business plan is. We've identified the 10 sections of our business plan, and we have planned, we have visualized, we have cast the vision to what we believe it will do. And just a quick reminder, I don't care if it's a business for profit or a business plan for a nonprofit. It is a living, breathing document that needs to be reviewed and needs to be responded to. That is so important. The whole point of that piece of it is when you put as many risk mitigation policies in place, that can two things. There is a balance here. It can throttle you if you can't do anything because the plan says you can't do this, but it also gives guidelines so that if something out of the ordinary, another opportunity comes up, another area of ministry comes up, that the powers that be, the people, the director and the board and the advisory board, whoever, can then take a look and say, does this fit, or do we need to modify our business plan? The business plan is simply a way to memorialize and document the vision and the purpose of that business or nonprofit.
It also lets everybody know where you're headed. It's an engagement tool. And I want to go back to what I said just a minute ago. We tend to be on automatic pilot running a nonprofit. We don't think we need all these business systems installed in our enterprise, when in fact, when we don't do that, those are the very things that limit our effectiveness and maybe cause a disaster. So there are some pitfalls. In our previous conversation, you used the word pitfalls. So the potential pitfalls that we can have happen. I mentioned one type of them. What are some of the pitfalls, and who needs to be aware of the potential of those?
Hugh, the underlying issue, the catalyst sometimes is our ability to ask questions and the ability to ignore questions. And you and I've had this discussion before. There's two reasons people ask questions. That the reason they ask questions, they're genuinely curious and they're seeking new data points, right? Or they're looking for someone to affirm and agree with them. I did a great job, didn't I, Hugh? So, yeah, let's pat me on the back. I'm asking you to pat me on the back. So that's, but the first kind, the staying in curiosity and seeking new data points, is the sign of the true leader. That is the sign of exploring. Did we make everything? Did we not? Did we miss anything? That's what a leader, and it's easy, as you said, autopilot. It's easy to get on autopilot sometimes and just assume that things are taken care of. And of course, everybody knows, kind of like CYA, what the acronym for assume is, and I'm not going to repeat that here, but you know what it is. The reason people don't ask questions is they don't want new data points. And the reason they don't want new data points, because then they are responsible and accountable to process that information and then make a decision what to do with that information. And that gets people very uncomfortable. Your example just now, fraud, 3 nonprofits inside the small town. So I've heard this once, if I've heard it 2 or 3 dozen times in my 14 years in consulting. When did you first become aware of this issue? And you say, I don't know, 4 to 6 months ago. All right. So Hugh, go run to the bathroom, get a mirror, and then look in the mirror. And that is the person responsible for anything that happened in the last 4 or 6 months, because you didn't ask the question. So you have to ask yourself, and I'm softening this a little bit, you have to ask yourself, why didn't you ask the question? And the answer is there's a myriad. Childhood friend, sister-in-law, brother-in-law, my best buddy, referred by somebody else. And your point was well taken. They didn't complete the due diligence in order to get the background check done. You still may miss it. Somebody still may pass through. There are plenty of sociopaths and narcissists out there. They may be charming on the outside. They still may slip through. But at least you've done this. And the other piece of that is training. How do you have those crucial and sometimes confrontational conversations? It is all about the mission and vision for your business or your nonprofit. And anything that comes against that and threatens it needs to be addressed immediately.
Or it gets worse. Yeah. And
it can be your word.
Huh?
Yeah. Your word is disaster. Your word's disaster. It can shut it down. It can absolutely shut down a business. It can shut down a nonprofit. I've seen churches fold because of these types of activities.
Yes, I've seen small, medium-sized businesses actually fold because inside corruption. So you've worked in corporate America. You've worked in higher education. You've worked in the church, have you? Or you belong to a mega church, but you've worked in various settings, and I guess you find some of the same deficiencies in all of them, right?
Absolutely. Because if it weren't for the dang human beings, we'd have a great organization, right?
Yeah. So it's the problem that exists when leaders don't step up to what they need to be doing. And we don't want to confront issues because we see that as harsh, when really, if you break down confront, it means with your front. We're not bashing people, we're facing it. And so I did a webinar last week on conflict. And one of the worst things we do is not to deal with it. And then a little thing becomes nuclear. And so there's a number of examples here. So one area of compliance is do the due diligence with your background check. Also install systems. And here's an example. I served, as you know, some very large mega churches. And I went into one and there was this form for requesting a check. And then they said, oh, you just fill it out and sign it, and then we'll write you a check. I said, no way. I'm gonna fill it out and do a request, and I'm gonna send it to the person that supervises me. They're gonna sign off on it. It's got a budget line item, and then the treasurer or the administrative financial person writes the check, and the church treasurer signs the check. So that kind of safeguard systems, it's amazing how many people run the books, do the checks, do the balancing, do the accounting, one person. There's no systems in place. So is that a type of system that you advise people on?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in a church setting, because, smaller churches, we've got friends that pastor a smallish medium church. And they face that exactly what you just described, where one person was wearing all the hats. And listen, we do that as nonprofit owners. We do that as solopreneurs. We're wearing all the hats. And when you get to that point, especially in a nonprofit, that dividing of the duties, dividing of the responsibility, those checks and balances are so important. And I always tell my clients when they're ready to do the scale up is to review those systems and process checks and balances, and then make sure that when they redistribute the work across the new organization, that there are those safeguards in place. That's an excellent point you just made.
So when we go for money, especially grants, they're going to want to know, and sometimes we have to have audits. And so sometimes people giving us money want to know about the systems that we have in place. So if you've come by Facebook, this is the Nonprofit Exchange. We're talking to Dan Goodwin today about some establishing best practices, but installing some really good business systems and tools in the charities that we run, so that we can focus on the impact of our work and not get sidetracked by people that really are in trouble and want to take our money or otherwise compromise. Now, Dan, I encourage all business leaders to sit on a nonprofit board somewhere, because that's our service to the community. That's a form of philanthropy, which I've learned from my friend Bob Hopkins, whom you know. And we learn stuff about our businesses by giving to others, but it's part of our community duty and delight, that, as we say in our faith. But we're responsible. The board members are ultimately responsible. So what's your advice to business leaders and community leaders who sit on nonprofit boards? Because the buck stops with them. They're ultimately responsible for all the financials of the organization, as well as contracts and misbehaviors of people on the staff.
That's correct. And I think that's overlooked. I know people say, I think I'd like to be on a board somewhere. And I was like, okay, is this a profit or nonprofit? What are you thinking? And if they've never thought or had that desire before, to find out that they are personally liable for actions, I mean, it's a real eye opener sometimes. So here's what I would tell prospective board members thinking that's what they would like to do someday. And that is, guess what? You need to flip the script. You need to do the due diligence on the organization. Is this something you're behind? Can you exactly go in and interview people? Can you find out if your visions align and your values align? Can you go in and look at and I'm not saying that the nonprofit would need to open their books, but can you look at the processes by which they do fundraising and galas and continuing education for their members? Look at all of these things before you sign on to say, yeah, I want to be a part of this, and I'm putting my Dan Goodwin here, I'm putting my Hugh Ballou here, because it is a reflection of you also. It's a reflection of your professionalism, your reputation in the community, and obviously you buy into somewhat of the vision for you to even consider it. But I would say flip the script and do your own due diligence in reverse. Does that make sense to you?
It makes a huge amount of sense. And we were blind. We have blind spots. Oh, it's good people doing good work. We don't need to do all that. We're just very polite. Well, we can still be polite and ask very good questions, realizing that we're responsible. Once we say yes to the board of 2-3 years or whatever it is, we get a vote. And actually, the financials are public information. If you're have to do a 990 form, it's public information. So everybody's going to know what's going on. So you just need to ask the hard questions. And we're not insulting people. We're doing our, like you say, our due diligence. So that's part of our personal best practices. And you just highlighted things that we teach. When you get a board member, do they fit the values and principles that you stand for? And are they going to be otherwise they're never going to be a good board member. We need to get that out of the way at the beginning. So we're running a nonprofit. When's a good time to start putting some of these processes in place?
Before you organize the paperwork. How's that? Before you file the paperwork. Absolutely. Listen, the planning process on the front end is absolutely crucial. Number one, listen, the paperwork is the paperwork. And I'm not making light of it because I know it takes a while and I know there's details. It is the coming together before anybody signs off as as the director of a nonprofit. It starts way before that. And it is working it and massaging it and laying those plans out. And that's the time to start all of these implementations, all these practices, to go out and seek knowledge, seek data points, and make sure that barring a disaster, you are employing and you're attracting the right people to your nonprofit.
Now, your title, thank you for that. That's good advice. Your title is Corporate Lessons Applied to Entrepreneurship, which I'm adopting nonprofits under the social entrepreneur banner. There's lots of corporate issues. I work for groups like accountants and quality control people and HR people. I work with those groups in doing keynotes or workshops. And they all say, I wish the leadership would listen to what we have to tell them. You know, we have relevant information that would make this organization run better. So there's classic examples of failure in leadership. You know, IBM came out with a personal computer and thought it was a toy and didn't think it was worth, protecting any of the property. So they just let it go. Kodak was the #1 in silver imaging in the world. And they thought digital imaging was a fad. They didn't treat it seriously. So they went from controlling that whole market to going bankrupt. So there's many lessons to learn from corporate leaders not asking the questions, like you said, and not paying attention to what's really going on. So what do we learn from corporate America that we can install in our leadership for our organization and the community where we lead?
Communication is the key. Communication up, down, sideways. And if you're in a nonprofit, to your patrons, right? To the fundraising events. And one thing that's thrown in the mix after 30 plus years of experience is the impact of social media, to pay attention, not discount it, and to make sure that someone is on top of it. Decide those standards up front. These are the issues that I'm working with a nonprofit right now in startup phase and saying, who do you have on this? How do they align visions, values? And it's the same question you would ask in corporate America. Are you a fit for this job? And the one advantage that corporate America has sometimes over solopreneurs, or the volunteer army, as I like to call the people that are attracted to the mission of a nonprofit, is I call it the wearing of the hats. And Hugh, you know this. I mean, it's the CMO, the CTO, the CFO, the COO, the CEO. And what are those equivalencies? What do we call those leadership positions within the nonprofit? Make sure that as you grow your nonprofit, that you are up-leveling talent every time you grow. There are things that I can do on a startup that when we hit a certain revenue, it is time to pass the torch. It's time to give somebody that has that expertise. That's what I observed in a corporate environment. And you just scratch your head sometimes because somebody that's technically the leader because they have all the head knowledge gets promoted to managing a team. And of course, you've heard this story lots of times. They have no people skills. they have no relationship building skills. And oh my goodness, it's a disaster. And then, management, they double down. So it's not that they can make the right decisions. It's they're by golly, they're going to make the decision right no matter what. And everybody's miserable, including the person that just got promoted, right? Including that person. So anyway, that's a lesson. And just ask great questions. And people say, well, don't want to be a snitch, don't want to embarrass anyone. And listen, my point in life, I'm way past that. It's just, you can ask confronting questions, and you can still do it professionally, and you can still do it and treat everybody human. 3 needs. Remember this, even a nonprofit. Person needs to be seen, they need to be heard, and they need to be validated. Even if I'm mad as fire at you right now for something you've done, Hugh, I can acknowledge, I can see you, I can listen, and I can validate you as a human being, even if I hate what you've done or not done, sins of omission, commission.
Love it. Love it. So sins of omission is where we fail lots of times as leaders, because I can't do that. It's not polite, but I can't make waves, but it's going to make a bigger wave if we don't deal with it. So we're talking about best practices. So a couple of things here. Define what best practices are. I mean, we've all heard it, but what is your definition of what is a best practice? And give us some examples of some really good best practices that we need to consider or we got to have in our nonprofit.
Okay. So best practice, let's start with the definition. Best practice allows you to operate at the highest and best optimal level in the present moment for the present task. How's that for just boom? I couldn't say it again, so don't ask me. Okay. So,
are they rules? Are they rules or guidelines? What are they?
To me, it's guidelines. Now, young Dan would have said, no, it's a hard and fast rule. You can't change that at all. You do have to look at the circumstances and you look at every different situation. Who you hire in your organization to be your to be your chief financial officer or equivalent may not have the same depth if you're hiring janitorial outsourcing crew, although it should, because I've worked plenty of internal cases in the past where we're getting taken to the cleaners, get the pun, taken to the cleaners by our cleaning crews. They were stealing equipment, etc. So the examples of best practices, I would say this, not to get bogged down in committees. However, it takes more than one person to hire, ideally more than one person to interview, and, interviewing by panel. And the ideal one that I've worked with is the 3-person panel. And any one of the 3 had veto power, and they were from 3 different places in the organization. That to me is a best practice, along with due diligence. That would be one. Let's see. Let's talk about software, hardware. So best practice is not to go with the cheapest, but go with and do your research. Go with someone that has demonstrated in the past they have the capability to do what you need to do, whether that be a CRM, financial software, documentation. All of these things are the cheapest, can cost you money in the long run. That's one of the things I tell my clients all the time. If you just are looking for the deal, remember that can cost you your company later. So that's a couple just examples I'll throw to you.
So there's lots of areas to consider. You put on the different hats and look at the different areas. Brand slaughter is where one person doesn't abide by the cultural norms, the guidelines, the values, the principles, guiding principles of how we function, and they do enormous damage. So there's probably best practices in hiring, which is the number one dysfunction in churches and nonprofits, is the search committee. They have this paradigm and they don't know what to ask, and they're putting squirt people in round holes. And another one is social media. We probably need to think about what is our standard practice? What is our best practice that identifies our brand and our brand promise and our brand value to the people we serve?
That's the biggest challenge right now that I'm working with clients. Who is making the decision for social media? And you don't have to go far to scroll through Instagram, look through Facebook posts, looked at LinkedIn, just name your channel and figure out, because if you will scroll through all the ones that I mentioned, you will find 99% of the examples of what you don't want to do, because those things rise to the top, they get viral, they get retweeted, they get reposted. And I don't have all the answers for that, Hugh. That is just a big mess.
It's a huge mess. And I call it the anti-social media. It's like, we've got this buzz thing, social distancing, which means nothing. We haven't distanced socially at all. We physically distance. So it's sort of anti-social distancing that those are examples of bad practices, that we misinterpret words and misuse them, and the words don't mean anything. So there's lots of ways we inadvertently install things that are either meaningless or send bad messages to people, right?
Absolutely. And sometimes, you know what? It's inadvertent. Sometimes it's not even intentional, and something gets twisted. Something gets absolutely sideways. And then you're having to backtrack, or you're trying to apologize when maybe no apology would let it die a quicker death. I don't know. Those are those crisis moments that we just kind of work through when they come. The whole prevent defense on that is one person, single point of contact that you highly trust, that understands the value, vision of the nonprofit, of the church, of the synagogue, that will post on behalf of. Remember, and this is, I can't remember if it's Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius, I don't know. You focus on the things you can control and not worry about the things you cannot control.
Yeah. So of course, neither you or I have ever made any of these mistakes. So I've learned to reframe mistakes as learning opportunities. So there is grace. So I don't hear you telling anybody they need to cut off somebody's head because they've made a mistake. I think what we want to live in is the preventative, and then how do we right it? Because there's a credibility damage when people go outside of these lines, aren't there?
Yes. Yeah. And you opened the whole show today, which I was inwardly, I was giggling, but you used the opportunity for reset. And if I'd have thought of that way back in the day when I was doing employee investigations, I might have used that phrase, opportunity for reset. Because basically I was there to give them an opportunity to tell their side of the story. And that was, I didn't hire, I didn't fire. just like Dragnet, right? Joe Friday for all the older people watching, just the facts, ma'am. That's really what we're all about. So
just the facts. Dan Goodwin, thank you for being a guest today. You've given us a whole lot of things that we need to wake up to and to think about. And so to contact Dan Goodwin, his email is on the page at thenonprofitexchange.org. And there's a QR code. If you got a camera and you can scan the image here, you can get that so that you can go directly to him. And I'll put the texting code on the webpage too. So if you want to contact Dan Goodwin, I'm sure he'd be glad to give you an opinion on some of these hard issues. I'll put you on the spot. Sorry, I didn't ask that. So as we end this helpful, there will be a transcription in a couple of days, and you can grab some of these best practice things in writing and save them because they are very valuable and they're essential to leading in any place, especially when we're dealing with other people's money in this charity that we run. So it's really crucial that we have this accountability and this transparency about our work. So Dan, what do you want to leave people with today?
Well, I'm gonna piggyback on what you said. No matter what, as the last 18 months, 20 months have been extraordinary in our lifetimes, and I always end I do the same sign off: practice grace, mercy, and love above all. You may have to make hard decisions. You may have to let someone go. You may not hire the person that you thought was going to be the rock star. No matter what, practice grace, mercy, and love.
Always. Dan Goodwin, thank you for your important messages today.
Thanks, you. Enjoyed being here.
Thank you for watching The Nonprofit Exchange.